G'day YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Mofo RC Rat SCX24 conversion kit. We're going to be doing a little bit of a review slash build overview. So if you're interested in finding out more about this build, stick around, it's coming right up. In this video we're just going to talk about some of the key aspects of the build, some things that I've learned, some things to avoid, some things to watch out for. So let's get started. So the first thing I did on this build was work on the paint. I just recently finished the WT Micro over here, and I used Krylon brand Fusion all-in-one paint on the WT Micro. I did not prime the resin body on the WT Micro because this said it's a paint and primer. It was actually recommended by Matt from WT Micro to use the Krylon paint, and I had really good results. You can see that the paint on the little Land Cruiser here laid down really nicely, and the results were fantastic. So that's what I wanted to use again here on the Rock Rat, and I selected the gloss icy grape color from Krylon. Now I repeated about the same conditions for painting this body. With the heater on in the workshop, it was about 60 degrees. And I washed the body with Dawn dish soap and warm water. I hit it with the gloss icy purple, and immediately the paint just fish-eyed. It did not want to stick to the plastic at all. It reacted like there was some oil on there, and I'm not really sure what happened there. The body, when I've got it out of the package, when it first arrived, had a very slight tackiness to it. So I don't know what that means. But what I do know is the paint just really did not like sticking to that surface. It fish-eyed like crazy, and I basically had to start again. I opted to let the paint that I'd put on there cure, and then test its adhesion a couple of days later and make sure that it was well stuck to the body. It did appear to be well stuck onto the body shell. So what I did was sanded it all back as best as I could. Cleaned it up again. This time I changed tacks a little bit. I took a toothbrush and some of this denatured alcohol. I don't know if that was a good idea or not, but that's what I did. I scrubbed it really well with that alcohol. I then hit it again with Dawn dish soap and warm water, and I came back at it with this Krylon Color Max primer. Now, I selected a Krylon brand of primer because I already had some purple Krylon paint on there. So I figured staying with that same brand would ensure the best compatibility, and it seems to have worked. So after sanding it back, recoating it again with that Krylon primer, letting it cure for a couple days, I was able to come back with the gloss icy grape. And the results aren't perfect, but it's got a nice shine to it, and pretty much what I was going for. So just something to watch out for if you are building one of these. Pay extra special attention to cleaning the body. I thought I had done a good enough job, but the paint just was not happy. And don't skip on the primer on this build. Even though I skipped the primer on the Land Cruiser and it worked out beautifully, I would not skip the primer on this Rock Rat build. So the build theme for this truck is the Joker. I already had these green Endura anodized wheels here, and that was pretty much, the wheels were the beginning of the idea. I wanted to figure out what colors went really nicely with the green. That led me in the direction of the purple and green combination. Pretty much sealed the deal for this truck being called the Joker. The other item I used to detail was this Molotow 1mm. It's a fine tipped paint pen. They call it liquid chrome, and it works out really beautifully for doing things like the door handles and the radiator cap here. You can see on the back there's a little bit of a silver playing card design to go with the Joker theme, and I designed that and cut it out with my vinyl cutter. The intake for the engine and the exhaust headers slash running boards are all done with the Color Max primer, and then I followed that up with the Krylon Fusion metallic silver. and I'm really happy with how it looks. Obviously you could go crazy with details on this thing, however I'm pretty satisfied with where it's sitting right now. Moving on to one of the more unique aspects of this build is the transmission. It's a really unique 3D printed transmission that allows you to run a pair of brush motors in a V or V8 style configuration, and this was one of the aspects that kind of sealed the deal for me. I thought the truck looked cool, but I really was interested in this transmission. The transmission's designed to utilize stock SCX24 internals, so essentially you just pull a stock SCX24 transmission apart, swap over the bearings, shafts and gears into this transmission. However, in practice, I found fitting the bearings into this transmission housing to be very, very tight. What I found helpful was just to take a standard utility knife and just carefully scrape and clean up the plastic down in those bores where those bearings fit. I still had to put the transmission on a flat surface and carefully press those bearings in. So that's something to just note there. They will be very tight, at least they were in this transmission. So take your time with that so you don't damage that transmission housing, and you shouldn't have any issues once you get those bearings installed. Other than that, it pretty much went together like a normal SCX24 transmission. Setting up the gear mesh on both motors is something you want to take your time with. The motor mounting plate is integrated and printed out of plastic, the same material that the transmission housing is printed out of. I think it's an SLS print. It feels very rigid and very durable, and I don't think strength will be an issue, but you do want to be careful and use the included motor mounting screws in the kit. They're a very shallow head. They're a fairly broad head to spread the load over that plastic mounting plate. So use those screws and just really take your time setting up the mesh. I found it easiest to set the mesh one motor at a time to make sure that you've got clearance on that spur gear. Once I had everything sitting where I wanted it to sit, what I ended up doing was removing each screw one screw at a time and just putting a very, very small amount of blue Loctite on those screws just to make sure everything was locked in. Nick from Mofo RC recommended using super glue. I opted to use the blue Loctite as I feel that that's more removable. I've run this thing a couple of times now and I haven't had any issues with those motors moving. So I think if you take your time with that, it's not going to give you much problems. Once you've got that transmission sorted out, you're going to want to start thinking about drive shafts. The transmission doesn't sit in exactly the same location as a stock C10 or JLU SCX24, so the drive shaft lengths are going to vary. I'm not 100% sure what lengths I ended up with. I did a bit of a mix and match of some standard axial shafts. I'll leave the part numbers down in the description. I use a combination of the standard shaft lengths that come in a packet of 3 different lengths, and I also utilize some of the gladiator length shafts as well. So like I said, it was kind of just a bit of a mix and match. Some of them are cut down and shortened a little bit to fit correctly, so that's something that will just take a little bit of messing around to get right, and using the standard plastic SCX24 shafts makes it pretty economical to mix and match and get the right lengths. For suspension links, the Rock Rat is designed to utilize stock C10 or JLU links front and rear. My original intention was I ordered some Endura high clearance stainless steel links. I've used those before and I really like them, so that's what I wanted to use on this build. I ordered them from somewhere that I don't normally order from because I wanted to get them in a hurry, and that backfired on me. They never showed up. I had to cancel the order, and I didn't have links in time for this build. So what I ended up doing is making some custom brass links in the JLU standard length for the back. For the front, I started out with standard JLU, and with these bigger Proline Trepidor tyres. I wasn't really happy with how the wheelbase sat. It felt a little bit too short for these larger tyres. So I took the links out and I actually extended them about 5 millimeters, I want to say. I don't have the exact numbers, but I pushed the front axle out about 5 or so millimeters. And the end result is a wheelbase that comes in right around 143 millimeters. And I think that that is a really, really nice match for these larger tyres. With the links out of the way, it was time to start thinking about axles, and I opted to use the Mofo X15 axles that I had here. I felt that was pretty appropriate for this build. They're a really sweet axle, super heavy duty, and I think for a build like this, they just fit really, really nicely. I already had this Endura 11 kilo servo. It's a larger high performance servo. It's a really tight squeeze between these rails. So one little trick that you can use, you can see that I've ground the C-channel part of the frame and I've ground it flat. You can use a grinder, you can use a file, Dremel, whatever you've got on hand. I just hit it with some black spray paint afterwards, and that's going to help give you enough clearance to get that articulation in the front. I've used some purple generic double barrel shocks. I pulled the springs out of it so that it's running a full droop setup, and just put some of the little black goodies hair ties on there to act as springs, and it's got a pretty decent amount of flex to it. So one thing that you might encounter with these SLS printed components is there's going to be times when you think there's supposed to be a screw hole in a component, but the screw hole's not there. Well, actually the screw hole is there, it's just completely filled up with the uncured or unbonded, I'm not sure the exact terminology for it in 3D printing, but it's basically the powdered nylon material that these things are made of, and when it's selectively sintered with a laser, you get a lot of that powder left over in all the nooks and crannies and screw holes and things like that. So you're going to want to make sure you've got some 1.2 millimeter drill bits on hand. I think I bought these a while ago. I honestly think these are a 1 millimeter. They measure out at 1.1 millimeters. So having something like that handy just to clean out those screw holes. You don't even need to mount it in a drill or anything. I just went in there and twisted the drill by hand just to help remove that material. You can then just blow it out, get that dust out of there, and it makes it a lot easier to assemble this thing. Likewise, when painting these SLS components, you're going to want to make sure before you hit it with paint that you clean all the nooks and crannies out, because the paint will lay over the top of that dust and it'll look like you've done a good job painting it, but then that section will just fall out because it's just loose, powdery plastic stuff. If you take your time with it, the chassis part of the build actually went fairly smoothly. If you don't force anything together, just take your time to clean anything up that looks like it needs cleaned up. You shouldn't have too much issue putting this thing together. It's actually a really clever design how everything ties in together. The magnets that retain the body, you can see down here and up in the top of the body there. Those magnets are extremely tight in there. I didn't even glue the magnets in. For the intake, just snaps onto the body there, and it's recommended that you use a drop of super glue. I didn't, because I had already painted the body and I didn't want to get super glue on my fingers and then ruin the finish on the body, so I've just gone ahead and pressed them in without glue, and I honestly don't think that they're going to come out of there. They're very, very tight. When you're building your Rock Rat kit, you're going to need to have a few different lengths of screws that are not included in the standard SCX24 ready to run. So I would recommend, before you even start putting this thing together, make sure you've got one of these little generic screw kits on hand. I can't even remember where I bought this from. I want to say it's an Endura SCX24 screw kit. So I'll leave a link down below for that screw kit. Get one of these before you even start building it. Just will save yourself a lot of hassle. The final build note that I'll leave you guys with is in regards to the screws used at the rear of the body for the hinging aspect of the body mount. Now, I want to say in the description on the Mofo website, Nick mentions using M3 by 10 millimeter screws, and I have an M3 grab kit of screws here. It's back inside the house, but I do have a selection of screws, and I kind of forgot the whole M3 by 10 note that was on the website. So I was screwing about trying to find the right combination of screw length, and I ended up installing a screw that was slightly too long. And whilst I didn't have an issue installing that slightly longer screw, when I went to back it out to make some adjustments, the head of the screw on its way past the body actually caught the body and snapped a piece of the body off. The body's fairly thick and durable, except on the sides here in this fender area, it's quite thin in section. So that's just something worth noting. Make sure you grab some M3 by 10 screws so you don't end up damaging the body like I did. Just a quick note on getting the weight bias set up in this vehicle. I'm using a 600 milliamp 2S LiPo, so I get a decent runtime with this twin motor setup. And you can see that the battery and electronics are mounted rearward of the vehicle's imaginary center line. So combine that with the weight of the printed hard body, and you end up with having quite a bit of weight over that rear axle. So in order to combat that and get a slightly forward weight bias, what I've opted to do is leave out the brass rings in the rear wheels. The front wheels, I have the Enduro brass rings inside them, and I've also got CCX RC TRX 4M brass knuckles mounted onto these X15 axles, and that works out pretty decently in terms of weight bias. It balances right around where the transmission bolts onto the skid, so slightly more forwards than a 50-50 weight bias. Obviously you could use a brass axle housing up front, you could mount a brass servo mount. The options are endless on how to get a little bit more weight over this front axle. You're probably not going to be picking this rig up for a comp build, but it is very capable as set up here. Let's get this thing out on the rock course and see what sort of performance we get out of this twin brushed motor setup. Now, I opted for the combo that comes with a pair of the Mofo RC buzzsaws. They come pre-installed with 14-tooth pinions, so slightly higher gearing than a stock SCX24. I think stock SCX24 pinions 11-tooth, so we've got a little bit of a bump up in gearing in terms of speed. I've heard good things about these motors in terms of slow crawl and top end punch. In this rig, we're running them on the Mofo RC Rock Wolf speed control, obviously flashed for brushed operation. So let's get it outside and see what sort of performance we get. So the first thing I noticed when hitting the rocks with this twin buzzsaw brushed motor setup is just how controllable these motors are at the low end of the spectrum. They're a pretty quick motor with a 40,000 RPM rating, and on 2S that equates to quite a bit of top end wheel speed. Plenty of punch for bouncing your way up tricky sections. All of that does come at the expense of occasionally feeling like you need to pull quite a lot of throttle trigger to get the vehicle moving, especially when it's in a little bit of a bind or you're nosed up against an obstacle. It's not easy to get the vehicle moving again with a small amount of throttle input. So that would be one trade-off of having a motor that can do everything on 2S. But if you do favor wheel speed, if you enjoy a bit of wheel speed and you want to run 2S, I think this motor combination is a pretty good balance of low speed controllability and top end punch. So we're about to ascend the newest obstacle on our backyard rock course here, and it's this steep V-notch. Now the vehicle set up as is with the new Proline Trepador tyres handles it really well. Very minimal wheel slip It's a lot steeper than it looks on camera, and I'm very impressed with those tires, and I'm impressed with this vehicle setup in general at the moment. So with the small amount of driving time that I've got on this vehicle, so far I'm really impressed with the Mofo RC Rock Rat kit. It's a very clever design. The twin motor transmission really is just the icing on the cake, and I think if you're in the market for a really cool and unique looking SCX24 vehicle, this one is a fantastic option. And I'm really looking forward to seeing more of these Mofo Rock Rat builds pop up as people get their hands on them. I just think we're going to start to see some really exciting builds, wild paint jobs, awesome custom touches. There's just so much potential here for some really unique builds. So I know this video is running kind of long. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. If you've stuck it out all the way to the end, that's awesome. I really hope you're able to get some value out of this video and use some of the information here for your own Mofo Rock Rat builds. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so you don't miss out on any future content. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate everyone that hangs out and gives their feedback, leaves comments. The interaction with the community is amazing. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.